Hello, I'm Joel Hunter, MD. Feels weird to say that, but I feel like for the rest of the video it's good to know that because I'm an ophthalmologist and all I do all day long is look at eyeballs, and I'm a refractive surgeon, so I try to fix people's prescriptions. And there's mostly just nearsightedness, farsightedness, and astigmatism. That's myopia, hyperopia, and astigmatism. Now the thing you may notice about that is that of those, the only one that's really famous, astigmatism. Astigmatism might be the most famous, least understood eye condition that there is. It's just in front of macular degeneration, which is even more famous, but slightly more well understood. So, what we're going to talk about today is astigmatism and what it is and how it affects your eye. And that's going to start now. Chapter 1, Astigmatism. So to understand it, it's helpful to write the word out. You'll notice that when you look at astigmatism, there's this word right in the middle here, stigma. Now stigma, what does it mean? Stigma is a dot. It's a point. You know what this got famous from? It's a stigmata. You remember, like it was stuff from like I don't know if you've ever watched any scary movies where people get the dots in their hands that represent the crucifixion. That's stigmata. It comes from that word, stigma. It's a point or a dot. And in our root language here, if you put a in front of anything, it just means not. And so astigma means there's not a dot. There's something that's keeping this thing from being a dot. It's either a trapezoid, it's a line, it's a comma, it's something, but it's not a dot. And that's astigma. Tism? I'm not sure. Words just sound more sciencey if you put tism at the end of them. Theotrochmatism. That's a word I just made up, but it sounded sciencey because I put tism at the end. So, on to what the rest of astigmatism is. So, now that we know astigmatism is not a dot, it's not a point, it lets us move on to what that means. So, why is a dot so important? Well, a dot, that's focused. But if I do the same thing and put some stuff over here and some things off there, and then now I have what looks like kind of like a hummingbird a little bit actually. See, there's wings there, and then he's holding some ribbons in his mouth. It's not a dot anymore. It's not focused anymore. What causes that? What causes astigmatism? That's anything that makes the contour of a lens anything less than perfect and smooth. Now, there's two different types. There's regular and there's irregular astigmatism. Irregular astigmatism is any surface that just doesn't have quite the polish that it should have. Anything there's on a microscopic level, if you walk across it, it looks like this. So you might have from this big macro view where a lens looks like this. Here's the macro. But on the micro, if you zoom in and look really small, instead it looks like this. If you've ever seen with a Cracker Jack box, you look through that little, you get a magnifying lens. Is that making me seem old? Probably is. But back in my day, there was a Cracker Jack box. You have this lens in there, and it worked. It was a magnifying glass, but it was very, very blurry. And it's because on a macro level, it looked like this. But on a micro, if you could shrink yourself down to be the size of a piece of dust and tried to walk across, you'd feel like you were walking across a bunch of craggly rocks. That's irregular astigmatism. It causes things to get sprayed around. In the human eye, though, regular astigmatism is the culprit. So we're going to get to what is regular astigmatism next. So, regular astigmatism. What that means is there is symmetry, and that's probably the key word. It's worth writing down. Symmetry means that if you were to draw a line through it in a specific direction, things would look the same on the right side and the left side, or above and below. And probably the best way to describe regular, symmetric astigmatism is to imagine a piece of plexiglass. Imagine if you were holding like a piece of plexiglass like 18 inches across or so, and you were holding it like this. It'd be flat, light would just focus right through it. But if you were to take that in your hands and just squeeze it just a little bit, then you'd have a change in it. It would change the surface. So this would be our plexiglass to start with. If we drew lines across it to have orientation, kind of looks like the windows on houses that I used to draw. Remember these things? Hold on. like this. That's what this looks like. That's a huge roof though. So that's the plexiglass without squeezing it at all. And then if you squeeze it, what happens? It bows outward like this. And if we draw our lines that represent the shape of it again, you can see now it looks, you know, almost like a sail on an old sail ship or something like that. And so you can imagine if an ant were to walk across this, he'd have a much steeper up and down hill this way, and he'd have a totally flat path walking across this way. That squeeze, that change, that is creating regular astigmatism. There is a symmetrical change in that curve. It's the reason that one of the colloquial terms for astigmatism is cylinder. It's cylinder because this is a cylindrical shape. You know, remember having to draw these and having to figure out the volume or whatever of a cylinder? That's this. If you just turn that cylinder on its side, that's what it looks like. So that's regular astigmatism. Now, that means that it lends itself to one last qualifying feature on your eye. Because if you imagine on your eye, if you have a cornea, the front of your eye, and it's perfectly round, it's going to look kind of like that. But if you were to come in and just squeeze that like you did your plexiglass, you're going to have the same kind of situation. It's going to be a steep curve in this direction and a flat curve in this direction. We're back to that same thing. Probably wouldn't be good to mention an ant because that's a creepy thought. But you know, if you were to imagine a tiny line being drawn across the front, it'd be a steeper curve in this direction and a flatter curve in this direction. That's astigmatism. So the qualifying feature of that on your eye or of this is the direction that it is. And that's the last thing that we want to get to. Actually, it's the penultimate thing we want to get to. That's penultimate. Means it's not the final. It's one before the final. So the last thing is axis. Now the idea of axis, it got a bad name in World War I because it was all the bad guys in World War I, unless you happen to be Austro-Hungarian, in which case I apologize to my Ottoman friends. But the axis in this case is not a bad World War I joke. It's actually the axis on a degrees of a compass. So if you remember, axis is you might remember these back in the day. You know, maybe middle school or high school. There was the x, or that's the y axis, and the x-axis, and there would be a degree to it. Remember the slope of a degree? Remember the whole y equals mx plus b? That was how you figured out the slope of something. You were trying to determine the direction of that. That's what the axis was. Well, remember when we drew our sail, our bent piece of plexiglass, it looks a little less bent there, but you get the idea. There's an axis there. This axis is traveling right through the middle. It's in this direction. But if you were to take that plexiglass and instead of doing that, you did this with your hands and you squeezed it in this way, the axis would instead look like this. It would go like this all the way through. And so we measure this in ophthalmology, in refractive surgery, optometry, glasses, contacts, anything that's measuring the astigmatism on your eye, it does that. And we measure it in these degrees. And the degrees go from 0 to 180 and from 90 to 270. However, to keep things simple, 90 and 90 is what we do, and we do 180 and 180. So for this first one, this would have astigmatism at 180 degrees. And this next one here, astigmatism at 90 degrees. And it works all the way through anywhere that you measure it. And so that's going to get us to our last point here, which is what those numbers mean when you look at your glasses or your contact lens prescription. Because there's 3 of them, and some of them have to do with this. So if you've ever looked at the numbers that show up on your glasses, you might have no astigmatism at all, or at least not enough that's necessary to fix, which is much more likely the case because everybody's got a little bit of astigmatism. Very rare to find a perfect sphere in nature. You may be thinking of Earth. No, it's slightly squished like a tomato. You may be thinking of tomatoes. No, it's also slightly squished like themselves. And so if you have astigmatism though, which most people will have a little bit of it in their prescription, your prescription might look something like this. It might say -3, -1.50 at 180. If you remember back to our sale, you'll probably know where this one's going to go. But this -3 number, what's that mean? That is just simply the sphere. And the sphere is just how nearsighted or how farsighted you are. If you're myopic, nearsighted, there'll be a minus sign there. If you're hyperopic, farsighted, your eye's missing power, you have to add the power, there'll be a plus sign there instead. This one, typically in optometry and refractive surgery, it's measured with minus instead of plus, although you can see it in plus sometimes if you see that on your prescription. It's still the same idea. This one is the astigmatism. Now the deal with this is, it's often called a cylinder instead. So you might see it abbreviated for short. It might say SIL on your contact lenses, and usually in all caps it'll say CYL. But that's cylinder just because we talked about how astigmatism is like a cylinder. And what this represents is the magnitude. How much of it do you have? This comes in these quarter diopter steps. So the least amount that you can have is 0.25 diopters. It's always measured in diopters. And the most you can have is, well, there's not really an upper limit. It'd be pretty unusual to have anything past 6 diopters though. Even the charts that, you know the thing, the fluoropter, better 1, better 2, better 1. Well, that's on my side. On your side, it's better 1, better 2, and you have to pick it. Those only go up to 6 diopters of cylinder. But this number, it represents how much of that do you have. So this would be a reasonable, moderate amount of astigmatism. There's probably about a fifth of the population has about this much astigmatism, a little bit less than that. And then this last one, it's our axis. And axis is just going to be the direction that it is. So this number, it can be anything from 1 all the way up to 180. If it's in contact lenses though, interestingly enough, it'll only come in 5 or 10 degree increments. So it might be 75 or 80 or maybe 80 or 90, but you won't find a contact lens that has an axis of 87. It's part of what makes contact lenses have a harder time of correcting your astigmatism really perfectly, because it has to round to what it's going to be correcting it at. So what glasses and what contact lenses are doing is they're taking these numbers that are the prescription for your eye, and that exact number of how much astigmatism, how much nearsightedness you have, is being put into that lens in exactly the opposite way. So it's the exact opposite of your handprint for the front of your eye. It's the opposite of what your eye is missing. And so when you do that, it cancels that all out. And so if you do all that and you put that in front of your eye, you know, what does that do? I'll tell you what it does. It gives you, get your stigma back. Makes a dot again. You no longer have astigmatism affecting your vision because you've now corrected it. And you can say that this vision is stigmatic. I would avoid it though, because it's a lot of confusion and no one ever says that. I hope that helped. Thank you for listening. You think that's good enough, or you think I should do something like, should I write goodbye? Probably, that'd be like a good capstone.
Do you have an idea?
Yeah, I'll do goodbye.
Okay.
But let's leave this in as like a bonus scene. Deleted footage, except it never got deleted. It's just on the video. And now, in the words of the great AOL man, goodbye. Thank you for listening.